Hey, I'm going to Death Valley in a few weeks, and I wish I could find a silo for my rope. I've checked out a few places, and they're all sold out.
Hey, did you hear? Emily just came out with a new Seco rope bag. That'd be perfect for Death Valley.
A Seca rope bag? What's that?
The Seco rope bag is designed specifically for dry canyons. It's made of cordura and vinyl, so it's more lightweight and compact than the ones made with foam.
Wow, that does sound perfect. Where can I find them?
Most of the retail places that sell Emily Canyon gear should have them in stock, or you can find them at canyoneeringusa.com.
Cool, thanks for the information on the new product. I really love Emily Canyon gear. I'm going to check right now.
Cool, I'll have a link for them in the show notes, so it'll make it easy for you to find out more about them. The Seco bags are also perfect for North Wash, Capitol Reef, Dry Zion canyons, anywhere you don't really need your bag to float. I really love how packable they are. Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Canyons Are Calling podcast. I'm Charles Jocelyn, your host for the show. First of all, I really want to apologize for not being able to get this episode edited before I left on my vacation last week. Totally left you guys hanging an extra week, and I really apologize for that. This episode with Rich Rudow and Todd Martin will totally be worth it. So first of all, who are Rich Rudow and Todd Martin? The probably biggest explorers of the Grand Canyon and canyoneering right now. They opened over 180 canyons in the Grand Canyon. Rich Rudow fell in love with the Grand Canyon at 25 when his wife gave him a rafting trip. Since then, he has explored over 180 slot canyons in the Grand Canyon, leading to over 100 technical first descents. He's done 13 river trips, most of which are in the river when he's rowing, pack rafting, and swimming. In 2015, at the age of 50, he's became one of the very few people that traverse the length of the Grand Canyon, staying beneath the rim and its three-dimensional maze for 57 days before coming out at Lake Mead. 5 years ago, Rich picked up a professional camera and determined to showcase the beauty of the Grand Canyon and inspire more people to protect the place. He spent more than 1,100 days exploring beneath the rim and became one of the foremost experts of the Grand Canyon backcountry. His photography is amazing, and I'm going to have several links to where you can follow Rich and his work in the show notes. Some of my favorite movies with Rich in them are The Last of the Great Unknown, which is by Dan Ransom and is about both Rich and Todd's exploration of the Grand Canyon. And then there's also a Nat Geo film that Rich helped with. It was Kevin Fidarco and Peter McBride, I believe, that did a documentary about how delicate the Grand Canyon is, and it's an incredible movie. So I'm going to have a link to that in the show notes as well. So who is Todd Martin? Todd and his wife live in Phoenix, Arizona, where he is employed as an environmental engineer. His hiking experience started when he got into backpacking in 1994. He hiked the 2,150-mile hike from Maine to Georgia, the Appalachian Trail. And he also, before that, was into skydiving, where he's logged over 2,800 jumps and was instructor in static line, tandem, and accelerator free fall. He got into canyoneering when he first bought Michael Kelsey's book, The Technical Guide to the Canyon Hiking Guide to the Colorado Plateau, however. He became fascinated in exploring slot canyons and decided to go further into the Grand Canyon. He is a member of the Canyoneering Association and Canyoneering e-groups. He's also a caver and into music and computers. So I feel like I've kept you waiting for this interview long enough. So let's get into it. Awesome. So today we're here with Rich Rudow and Todd Martin, who are Grand Canyon experts. If you don't mind just introducing yourself a little bit and telling us a little bit about yourselves.
Go ahead, Todd.
Oh, I'm Todd Martin. I am 57 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona with my wife and my cats. I've been interested in outdoor stuff most of my life. I've been a skydiver and a caver, hiker and backpacker. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm probably best known for hiking Grand Canyon and the book Grand Canyoneering.
Maybe also a little bit of the Arizona hiking slot canyons.
Oh yeah, I actually have published 2 guidebooks. The first one was a book of canyons in Arizona, just throughout the state. The reason I wrote that book was when I first started canyoneering, the only canyons I knew about were in Utah, and it's quite a drive for me coming from Phoenix. So I might get up to Utah once a year, maybe twice a year. So I thought I'd look around more locally to see if there were canyons closer, so I could do the activity more frequently. And that the first book, Arizona Technical Canyoneering, was the result of that effort.
Do you ever see yourself doing an updated version of that?
Yeah, I've thought about it. It is now out of print. I did one print run, and it's sold out at this point. Boy, in the age of the internet and digital technology, hard physical paper book, it's not as economically feasible as
Okay.
I might desire. So
I'm
probably
glad
not.
I own one then. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It's a collector's edition. You'll find it on Amazon for $500 in the next couple of years.
Right.
I'm gonna hold on to mine. All right, Rich, how about you?
Well, I think most people certainly know me for playing around the Grand Canyon as well. And I first saw the Grand Canyon in 1989 when my wife bought me a river trip. And from that point forward, it kind of became this infinitely deep vacuum that sucked me further and further into the abyss. And I started hiking trails like everybody does in the Grand Canyon, and then got mostly with my brother-in-law at that point. And then we got interested in doing off-trail stuff that Harvey Butchert had published with his kind of cryptic notes, and we would do some of those routes. And then at some point we thought we should bring a short rope, and that morphed into getting a little bit of training because my wife was really uncomfortable. We didn't know what we were doing, so she bought us rock climbing lessons. And so Dale and I learned about knots and things that were applicable to climbing, not quite as applicable to canyoneering, and that just emboldened us to play around with more adventurous routes and carry ropes that were a little bit longer. But by I guess 2000, maybe 7 or so, Todd and I had become acquainted, and we had come to realize that there were all of these slot canyons in the Grand Canyon, some of which I walked around over time, some of which I had discovered in Harvey Butchert's notes, where he was stopped from, coming up from the bottom, that, people generally had not seen before. And so Todd and I got really interested in starting to really explore this place. And so from maybe 2007 on, Todd and I teamed up and just started doing, canyon after canyon after canyon. We go spend, weekends. We take weeks off from work where we would go spend a week and hit as many canyons as we could in any given week. I think maybe at the height of when we were, really energized about this and young and able to move about the canyon faster, more capably than maybe we do today, I think we did 40 new canyons in 1 year, which was kind of a record for us. But continued to progress, and the more we found, the more we realized that there was stuff that we could go check out there that hadn't been seen before. So it kind of just became this really interesting place. It's much bigger than people realize, that enabled us to go out and explore just an entire green field, and kind of establish the approach and techniques to go explore something as complex as the Grand Canyon. So I just progressively morphed from my late 20s through today. I'm 56. Todd's the old man here. He's got me by 9 months, I think. Just progressively morphed over a long period of time, from doing things everybody does and hiking trails to getting more and more intrigued by the things in the remote areas that people don't get to see every day.
Very awesome. So tell us what Canyon and Grand Canyon entails. They're brutal.
Yeah, that's accurate. They're hard, and they're hard really because of the geography. The Grand Canyon is really big. It's bigger than the state of Delaware, for example. I think it contains 277 miles of the Colorado River. It's about 1,900 square miles in area. So it's immense, and on top of that, it's very vertical. So there is a mile of elevation change between the rim and the river, and to get to a lot of these canyons, you have to navigate these various layers that have very, very steep cliffs. So that itself, I think, dictates a lot of the difficulty for traveling in that area.
I think one of the things you realize when you spend enough time in the Grand Canyon, and fortunately, Todd and I, through backpacking trails, had learned this prior to he and I actually meeting. But there aren't slot canyons in the Grand Canyon that you do as day hikes. There are very, very few, right? So when you choose to go into that vertical terrain, you're choosing to adopt an expedition mentality, and you're choosing to go spend multiple days in committing multiple days on difficult routes to go see these places. And so you think about canyoning differently than most people think about canyoning today. The vast majority of canyoneers are day hikers, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's terrific to be able to go do day hike canyons. There might be half a dozen of those in the Grand Canyon out of 185 I've probably done. And so once you come to grips with the challenges of moving around the terrain, you have to go figure out what systems you create to be able to do that. And so it's not canyoning as most people are used to. It's full-on expedition canyoning every day, day after day, with a lot of complexity that comes with that kind of a challenge.
Yeah, you really can't. I don't think you can talk about canyoneering in Grand Canyon without talking about pack weight, because everything sort of follows from how much gear you have to carry, and you can just imagine. Typical trip is probably 2 to 4 days. I think that's about average. So you need overnight gear like you would for any backpacking trip. But we're doing exploration and canyoneering, so of course you need harness and helmet and webbing and rope. But because we're exploring, we tend to bring a lot of rope. This is a very vertical place, so we're carrying big ropes, a bulkhead, a wetsuit, and then if river crossing is involved, now we're carrying a pack raft and paddles and a life preserver. So you can see how the weight just adds up so quickly, and as a result, we worked very, very hard to minimize how much weight we we had to carry on these trips. But even so, the weight was often crushing. You just can't get away from it, especially when in the early days, it was really just Rich and I that were doing all these canyons, just the two of us. So there weren't a lot of people to split weight with.
That is impressive. Like, how long are the rappels that you would typically encounter? How much ropes are you carrying?
Well, with a vertical landscape that, is 5,000 feet from river to river, you can imagine it's a matter of just picking your canyons, right? You can have rappels almost as long as you want. We early on were wise enough to create a progression in what we were doing as we built these systems, and we learned, and over a long period of time, if you get really intimately familiar with the geology of the Grand Canyon, because that geology dictates how long these rappels will be, and the geology tends to drive, certain rock layers drive certain technical requirements, and you quickly begin to understand, what those are. And so the slot canyons in the Grand Canyon, the ones that are really, really interesting, the most interesting tend to be the limestone layers, which are, sandwiched, depending on what part of the canyon you're in. As Todd mentioned, it's, 277 river miles. It's, 1.2 million acres. So there are places in the Grand Canyon where the limestone slots go right down to the river, and there are places where in the canyon where the limestone slots in, 1,000 feet above the river or more. So it's kind of a function of where you're playing. So, I mean, if you put some boundary conditions on it, some of my favorite canyons aren't particularly technical at all. The longest rappel might be, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, maybe 100 or something. But I think there was one canyon we did once where it was a first descent, and we had scouted it we knew there was a big drop, and we had scouted that big drop from below, and we had used, we understood the geology of the place and where this canyon was located, and from the geology in these limestone layers, we had estimated the drop to be about 500 feet. And so we brought an entire spool of 8mm Canyon Pro DS, and it was measured to be 630 feet or so, and it proved to be too short. And the last 60 feet or so, when we got to the top of the, everything looks bigger from the top. From the bottom, scouting this, it couldn't be more than 500 feet. That was just the eyeball. That followed all the geology rules that we were aware of at the time, and we were pretty confident in that. But I remember standing at the top of that drop, and we were enormously concerned about how we were going to pull the rope and to deal with that. We ended up having to put a couple of bolts in at a very particular angle and a very particular place because it was polished smooth at the lip of this drop, and we needed the pull to be perfect. And standing up there working on that anchor, I remember just constantly looking down, realizing that, wow, does that look big? I mean, that looks bigger than 500. And of course, you don't know. And so I think at the last minute, I got cold feet and looked at Todd, and we were with a few other friends on this trip, which helped, spread the burden of the weight around a little bit, and said, I know it's probably not longer than the length of this rope, but let's rig a contingency anchor. And so we had a 200 that we rigged first with a Munter mule, and then tied the 630 to the 200. So if for some reason the 630 was too short, the top team could pull the mule knot and just lower the Munter down. And, I think we were all confident it wasn't bigger than, 800 feet. And as it turned out, I remember being 50 feet off the deck or so. We had radios and radioing up and saying, it doesn't reach. And that set off a big scramble because the anchor wasn't very accessible where it was placed. And so, Todd and a few of the other folks had to kind of scramble around to get in position to pull the mule knot and let some more rope out with the Munter.
That's smart that you thought of that ahead of time. That's
Yeah.
really, really awesome.
Well, look, I'm not going to lie. Some of this is, experience, judgment, progressively understanding a particular place, but some of it's luck. And
Right.
I think we dodged the bullet there in, kind of, there was never any danger. I could have jugged up to a place where there was a little bit of a shelf. So, I mean, it wasn't like we were taking a gigantic risk, but, you know, uh, trying to navigate a canyon like that with drops that big takes an enormous amount of time. And you don't really appreciate, you can't bivvy in these canyons. You need to get out of the narrow slot part of the limestone canyons to find a safe place to bivvy. So, there are these kind of pressures around you that drive, time. And I remember it being, there were 6 of us coming down this drop, and I remember it being, toward dusk as the last person was coming down. It was getting pretty late.
Pretty intense. How did the rest of the group navigate that after the munter was done? Like
Yeah.
they just must have not at that certain
Well,
spot?
we realized on the way down the rope, when you come out of this canyon, you're on a wall for about 40 feet or so, and then it's completely free hanging. And the limestone in these canyons often will bell out where it creates a giant, bulbous bell away from you in the wall of the canyon. So you're completely free hanging 30, 40 feet from the wall. And this canyon was like that for, more than 400 feet. But there was a shelf down about 450 feet, and the rope had kind of jumbled up on the shelf. And, I kind of gathered it up and threw it over the edge so I could keep going. And so, remembering that, once I hit the end of the rope, I communicated to the top team that, they could rappel 450, pull the rope, reset another anchor at that small shelf, and then come down the rest of the way.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Nice. What's this canyon called?
To Pete's Cave.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Okay.
no.
Yep. Yeah. To Pete's Cave Canyon.
Yeah, it's in Todd's book.
Okay. If anyone else wants to repeat it and do that.
That's pretty much the extent of the canyon, to be honest, is that rappel. There's some canyon.
I remember, 5 rappels above it. It's short up
there's some
and nice, but they're the entire route for this canyon is really beautiful. The limestone slot by Grand Canyon standards is rather short because of the giant drop, but there's a beautiful cave there that the drainage is named after. There's a running stream. The entire route is just incredibly scenic.
Well, so if it's into Pete's Cave, then that goes up to Pete's Cave and Thunder River, right?
That's the source of Pete's Creek.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that is the source of Pete's Creek, comes out of this cave system.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. In this case, we knew there was a big drop. A lot of canyons, we would just look at the topo map and try to make an educated guess. And I think what we stumbled upon was that the ideal rope length for most exploration was 250 feet. So I think, Rich, you carried that 250-foot rope on most of these trips when we were exploring, and that worked out pretty well. There were a few instances where it was a bit
short,
cutting it a bit close, but it was largely.
We probably had a dozen adventures where we found ourselves with a rope that was too short and had to do a lot of monkey business to deal with the problem. But yeah, in the effort to minimize weight, we learned pretty quickly that you can get 90% of the places with a 250-foot rope, 100-foot working rope, 300-foot pull cord, an emergency bolt kit, lots of webbing. And, that was kind of the standard, technical kit. And it's pretty thin by, some people's standards. But I think a lot of canyoneers may not appreciate the fact that each each geographic region tends to develop its own rules for these canyons. The Grand Canyon has characteristics that you can kind of count on that you would never count on in, Zion or, Glen Canyon or Death Valley, or, there are just rules in each of those localities. And if you spend enough time exploring in a particular locality, wherever it is, you start to learn what those rules of the landscape are, and you start to, tailor the kit you're going to carry as a result. But yeah, everything was driven by weight. I mean, it was just so hard to move around that landscape. If you got more than 50 pounds, it was almost, impossible to safely move around the landscape. I think a lot of people that are not that familiar with the Grand Canyon may not realize that there just aren't any trails in this landscape. The trails that people are aware of are in this central part of the canyon called the corridor that makes up 100,000 acres. And Grand Canyon is 1.2 million acres, and the best limestone slot canyons tend to be outside of that corridor area. So there's no trail access to most of these canyons. And the end result is you're coming off the rim on these, really difficult, steep, scree-filled routes with different cliff bands to navigate, where missteps just aren't allowed. You're, traversing terraces down to different geologic rock bands. So you're going through rock band after rock band after rock band, each of which tends to have its own rules for, how you move, whether they're technical or not, how hard you work on finding a non-technical approach, because every time you every time you add a technical entry before you get to the slot canyon, it slows it down enormously. And so you're constantly looking for ways to move about the landscape to get to the head of the limestone slot without having to put your harness on and deploy ropes. So that necessity to move over that kind of terrain just absolutely drives the need to be as light as you possibly can. It's just not safe otherwise.
Yeah, probably one way where Grand Canyon actually might be easier than some places is there's a river that runs right through the middle of it. And that river can be used to travel from location to location. And boy, it is 3 miles. If you have a pack raft and you're trying to travel downstream, you can just sit in your boat and cover miles with little effort. And one of the nice things that came out of this project was we work closely with some of the park rangers, Todd Seliga in particular, and with Rich worked quite a bit with the Park Service itself on issues surrounding the use of pack rafts. Pack rafts were a very new concept to the Park Service when we started this project.
Yeah, they were not legal when we started this project. We conveniently ignored that fact early on.
I wasn't gonna. I've forgotten that part.
Now, what is the regulation? You can do it like so far from one trailhead to another, right?
Yeah, you can go up to 8 miles now on the river. Pack rafting in the Grand Canyon is an absolute necessity to see many of the slot canyons. I would just venture a rough guess right now that 60% of the canyons that you might do, and some of the most beautiful canyons in the park, are only accessible if a pack raft can be used to escape. Because you end up at the river, what do you do? Sometimes you're cliffed out and you can't go any place. And so a pack raft allows you to travel to a place where you can logically climb back out to the rim. And so it was an absolute game changer. It was obvious to us early on when Todd and I were thinking about these adventures and canyons we wanted to go do, that a pack raft was just a crucial tool. I think the first time we used a pack raft, the execution was brilliant for a short period, and then it was not good at all. We quickly learned that there's a very fine line in
between brilliant and stupid. That's right.
Yeah. Brilliant and stupid at the same time.
So how did you go about getting the Park Service on board with the pack rafts?
Well,
All you guys or other people too?
yeah. So one of the benefits of for a long time, Todd and I would roam around pretty much doing whatever we thought we needed to do to go explore these places, not paying particular attention to the subtleties that might exist in some of the rules, like the lack of pack rafting rules. But ultimately, some of the rangers became quite interested in what we were finding and wanted to do trips and understand this stuff. And we were fortunate that one of the rangers in particular had experience with pack rafting and understood the value of the tool, and actually was using that tool for patrol purposes in the park, even though it wasn't really legal for recreational use. And so that kind of began a long period of dialogue with the park on creating this finesse. Getting a river permit to run the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon is incredibly difficult. It's probably one of the hardest permits to get in the country, maybe right up there with the Yampa. But getting a river permit is phenomenally difficult. There's a lottery to do it. People try for decades and don't win. And so there was this incredible sensitivity with the park that the boating community didn't look at what Canyoneers were doing with pack rafts and believe for a minute that they were cutting in line on a river trip. And so that created all of this tension, in some cases, just flat out public outcry between user groups, between the Coalition of American Canyoneers and various boating user groups that were quite adversarial early on. And so there was this tension in trying to determine rules that allowed canyoneers to logically escape these slot canyons and get back to the rim as part of doing a route, but didn't push it so far that people that worked for a decade or more to get a river permit didn't think that you were cutting in line. And it's hard. All these user groups have their own point of view, and we spent a lot of time working with those user groups. It started out as being adversarial and rough and tumble, and over time it became, through a lot of dialogue with these groups and with the Park Service, it became better understood by all the user groups and more supported by all the user groups. And originally you could go 5 miles only, and anything longer wasn't allowed. And then the park was updating their backcountry management plan, and Todd and I in particular spent a lot of time on working with the park and commenting on the plan about the idea that Grand Canyon wasn't geologically built to allow you to get out every 5 miles. And we had proposed a zone system. In certain zones, you should be able to pack raft to the first rational exit, but no further. And so the zone system was created that eventually garnered some support from the Park Service and from other user groups. The park didn't end up finishing the backcountry plan, and they didn't end up adopting the rules. It's sitting in this state of limbo right now, unfinished, which is really a shame. So at some point, knowing that the backcountry plan wasn't a priority to get released, the park revisited some routes. I spent a bunch of time with them under, as part of the Coalition of American Canyoneers board to increase the 5 mile rule. And we arrived at 8 as a, not really as a compromise, but as a number that would support descending certain technical canyons and getting to a rational exit. And that covered, 95% of the use cases. And that, worked out well. But it was a 6 or 7 year effort, and, debate, fight, period of education, et cetera, before pack rafting became accepted. Now it's accepted. Backpackers do it. By the way, Todd may have mentioned this before, but people were pack rafting in the river 40 or 50 years ago. I mean, we weren't the first to ever pack raft in the river, but they were doing what Todd and I were doing, improvising and trying to get someplace and not really asking for permission with the park. but there was a historical, very infrequent use for adventurous travelers out there. But today it's very routine. Backpackers have created new routes where crossing the river is essential, or going downstream a few miles is essential, and they use pack rafts all the time. Canyoneers use pack rafts all the time. You see pack rafts being used even on river trips, much more frequently now than they ever were before. Even though you're covered under a river permit in that use case, people use pack rafts. We use them on canyoneering river trips all the time. We'll float by a canyon, drop pack rafts at the mouth and hide them, and then float downstream, then climb to the top of the limestone layers and do a multi-day trip back to the top of the canyon and rappel through, and then take the pack rafts back to the boats. So a pack raft's become a very common tool to really enable backcountry travel in a canyon. 10 years ago, it was a very controversial idea, but pretty cool today to see that, it's just commonplace. People just do it, and don't. People forget the battles that were required to get to where we are today. And I cringe when I see people abusing the privilege, because they don't understand how hard it was for us to get where we are, and how easy it is for the park to get irritated by people that might be abusing the privilege, like going way too far, doing things like that, to have it blow back on the rest of us that, abide by those rules.
Yeah, that is unfortunate that a few people could possibly ruin it for the rest of us. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for your determination in getting the pack rafts passed for Canyoneerers. And then also I want to ask, what type of pack rafts do you recommend? Should we just go to Walmart and get this cheap little blow up toy, or should we get something more reliable?
We kind of did that in the early days.
I've heard stories.
Yeah, I think there was a period of 2 or 3 years where we were doing a lot of experimentation to try to figure out what worked. And early on, we were using a commercially available boat you could buy at Walmart called a Settler Trail boat that weighed 3.5 pounds, and it was small and packable, but it was pretty heavy. And we were constantly looking to improve on that. I remember one trip early on, Todd and I and Ram and Tom and Sonny Lawrence and Aaron Locander, we did a first descent canyon, and we all had different boats. Everybody was experimenting, trying to figure out what could work, what wouldn't work. And Aaron Locander went so far as to build his own. And we were, super impressed with how light it was. And obviously he was the guinea pig. If he sank to the bottom of the river, we would have, oh, well, that didn't work. Nice try, Aaron. But it worked great. And that was the very beginning of Supai Adventure Gear. Aaron and his wife Shannon owned that business, and that is the lightweight pack raft that you can haul off the rim, move about the backcountry, and go through canyons and escape. But there are a lot more pack rafts that are available today. Most of them tend to be a lot heavier, though, that are suitable for whitewater, but not suitable for carrying your pack. I have 3 or 4 different kinds of pack rafts for different things. But if I'm coming off the rim of the Grand Canyon and doing a difficult route, and I'm having to pack raft out, I'm always carrying a Supai Adventure Gear boat and a lightweight paddle they developed and a lightweight PFD over other things. I have an alpaca and other stuff that's terrific for whitewater, but it's just too heavy to come off the rim with.
That's awesome. We actually rent out the Supai pack rafts. If anybody needs to rent one for a trip, they can go to Canyoneering USA.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific service that Tom's providing, because a lot of people that are getting their first exposure to the Grand Canyon are going to do a canyon like Cove Canyon, for example. Todd and I did the first descent of that, 12 years ago or more. And it's a stunning slot canyon, but it's also relatively accessible. You get a hint of the wilderness, remote parts of the park. You get, a little challenging pack raft with some good riffles for 5 miles. You get a hard exit. But fortunately, you don't have to start at the rim. You start, 1,800 feet down at the Esplanade level. But for people that are getting their first experience in the Grand Canyon, trying to decide if it's something that they want to do more of, being able to rent a boat from Imlay Canyon Gear is just an amazing service.
Yeah. I don't think that a lot of people know about it, but yeah.
Wow.
A good thing.
I mean,
So now we can
when we blow up the internet with this, everybody's going to know. I mean, it was such a funny story. The canyon that Todd and Tom and Sonny and Ram and I and Aaron were doing was a canyon called 36.7 Mile Canyon in Marble Canyon. And this was probably 2008 or 2009. And no kidding, we all had different boats. And I remember Todd had one. I don't remember where you got that, but it filled half your pack.
Yeah, it was it was a demo from, oh goodness, NRS. NRS was prototyping a pack raft, and somehow I don't remember how I got they lent me the version of the boat, but yeah, what quickly became clear was they weren't thinking about Grand Canyon when they designed this boat. It could easily fit 2 people. It was enormous, but yeah, I lugged it on this trip just to test it out.
I remember a lot of things from that trip. One of them toward the end was Tom decided that he was going to create his own paddle system to save weight that would incorporate his trekking poles. And I remember when we got on the river, Tom's paddle system abruptly stopped working. He was, kind of flailing about, hand paddling, going downstream. I remember, Todd was trying to, move this orca downstream. And, Aaron and Sonny and I had different boats, and we're all, getting downstream. And we got down toward President Harding Rapid, and Tom flipped. And I remember this yard sale. Tom, at that point, Tom was making do with whatever he could because his paddle idea didn't work out. And I remember his pack went one way and his boat went another way, and Tom went a third way, and we were all, just scrambling around like just a bunch of crazies trying to pick this yard sale up as he's being swept through President Harding Rapid.
Oh man.
Good times in the early days of pack rafting.
Sounds intense. Oh, that's awesome. So let's talk about a couple of your other favorite canyons in the Grand Canyon.
Well, probably the canyon that I'm most proud of. First, because it's one of the best canyons in all of Grand Canyon, is Garden Creek. So Garden Creek, for those that aren't familiar with it, is located right off the Bright Angel Trail, which comes off the south rim of Grand Canyon. So Bright Angel is I think it's unquestionably the most popular trail in the entire canyon.
Yeah.
So there's the most beautiful canyon next to the most popular trail in one of the most popular national parks in the country. And I just imagine thousands of people walking right by the mouth of this canyon year after year, but nobody, thinking that, realizing that it was there. And I guess what's also amazing is you can see. So within Garden Creek, there's this big Horsetail Falls. It's almost, what is it, Rich? 350 feet?
400 feet. Yeah.
400.
Yeah, all the way down.
And you can actually see this Horsetail Falls from various viewpoints in the canyon. So the fact that When we first explored it, what became obvious was that there was no evidence that anybody had ever been in the canyon before, which was just amazing. But what became obvious within the first 30 feet was that that this was going to become a trade route, because it's such a stunning canyon. It has perpetual flowing water. It descends down this Horsetail Falls, which is one of the most unique features, I think, in all of Grand Canyon. The lower part of the canyon is just gorgeous, and yeah, I was just felt very pleased that we had sort of plucked this canyon, really right out from under the noses of of so many people. I guess afterwards we found, Rich found that a ranger had descended it at some point, like in the 90s.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Tom Myers, said, I think this guy may have gone down that. And he put me in touch with him. He was the chief ranger at Grand Teton by this time. And he relayed this adventure where they got partway down the canyon. They got to the Horsetail Falls, realized that their ropes were too short, had, real epic kind of experience, and figured out how to scramble out. They got out there in the middle of the canyon, and that was it. they as I recall, never went back and did it again. It became, an adventure not to be repeated. And
Oh man.
But Garden Creek is good for, it is a canyon that is accessible to most people. It's on, you spend very little time off trail, so you can follow the Bright Angel Trail in and out, which greatly simplifies logistics. You can spend a night at Garden Creek Campground if you can get a permit, so you can break the trip up, so it's not too hard. So in addition to being just stunning, it's also one of the most accessible canyons in Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I remember when we first did Garden Creek, I had years and years ago, my brother-in-law Dale and I had come up to the bottom of Garden Creek, and we had climbed up pretty far, up until this kind of waterfall feature. And so I knew the lower part of the canyon was really scenic. But Todd and I had become focused on these limestone slots. Garden Creek is in the 1.8 billion year old Vishnu schist, and it's got this pink Zoroaster granite intrusion. And it turns out that a lot of the canyon is this pink Zoroaster granite. It's just stunningly beautiful, but it's in the basement rock of the Grand Canyon, and that's very unusual. And Todd and I had gotten focused early on in the limestone layers where the slots were really unique and unusual. And it was such a green field. We didn't expect to find anybody else. After doing a number of these and realizing that there's nothing, we're not finding pitons, bolts, webbing, people just have never been to these places. By the time we got to Garden Creek and decided to do it, we were all just absolutely incredulous that seemingly nobody was there. I mean, we would have expected somebody to be doing that every weekend. And we had a little bit of an epic there, even though we had scouted it really well. We didn't realize that 400-foot drop was really 400. It just didn't look that big. And Todd went first. We rigged a 200. I remember looking down, and he's, halfway, and the water is blowing through there, and I see him moving his right arm, shaking it up and down, and he's trying to fish the bottom of the rope out to find out how much rope he's got left. Because we didn't tie knots at the end of these drops or anything, especially in a Class C canyon. There's some, maybe some safety issues, but when I saw the end of the rope flip up, I realized that we had completely underestimated how much rope was required to get through that canyon. And Todd managed to do this delicate, dicey climb to Canyon Left, and managed to
wet polished granite.
Really sick. It's like rock with oil on it, that's slippery. And I imagine now, that's probably exactly what that ranger did in the 90s when he got in trouble. He managed to escape that way. We did have a longer rope. Our friend Albert and I deployed the 350 that we had and came down. and it was still short. And Albert and I had to do our own version of, delicate down climbing the last 50 feet to get out. So it was quite an experience the first time through. And in fact, I remember we were exploring other canyons in that general area a few months later, and we had quickly decided that was just an amazing place, and it was just too hard to carry a 400-foot rope. And so we went back, and Todd and I went down that, and there was a perfect place mid-wall in that 400-foot waterfall where we could place a bolt. And we put a bolt in there, and for years that was the mid-wall anchor that you would use. So you could bring two 200s down to the mid-wall, clip off, switch over to the lower 200, and then keep going. And it was amazing. That canyon was just pristine. It was amazing. Eventually, it got well known and popular, and I think somebody thought they could guide the canyon, which is illegal in the Grand Canyon. And eventually, overnight, one night, 14 bolts appeared, and the entire the entire canyon to this day is bolted. It's a trade route. It's a Class C canyon. The bolts were exceptionally well done, well placed. Whoever put the bolts in was quite accomplished. They used a hammer drill, undoubtedly. 14 bolts would take 2 days to put in with a hammer drill. There's just no way they could have pulled that off. So anyway, the canyon was altered because people that came later decided that it ought to be different for some reason, and that's kind of disappointing. But sometimes that's what happens when you've got something so close to civilization.
Yeah, let's dumb down the canyon instead of smarten up the canyoneer.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie though, it's still phenomenally beautiful. I mean,
awesome. That one has been on my radar for a long time. I honestly haven't done much in the Grand Canyon, sadly. I've done like Soap and Badger, which I don't even really think count.
Those are fun. Badger was in Todd's first book. It's a really good canyon.
Hidden Creek was on my list a long time ago, and maybe I'm thinking now that I'm talking to you, maybe we should add that to our Rim to Rim in November. I don't know if we'll be able to do it. But.
You should.
The weight is honestly what scares me off. And I did Thunder River and Deer Creek and hiking out of there just with backpack gear. I'm I can't imagine all of my canyoneering stuff. I just need to get more exposure for hiking up things because that's steep and it's brutal.
Well, you had mentioned Cameron before we went live here, but I happen to know that there's a Garden Creek trip coming up. Maybe you should join it.
Ooh. All right.
We can talk offline. It's not my trip, but I'll be on the trip. But
okay. That sounds awesome.
On the trip too, and
okay.
Somebody else has organized it, so it's going to be done as a day hike, which is really a cool way to do it. Because in the summer it's so hot, you go down, play around in the water where it's nice and cool, and hike out at night.
Yeah. The first time I ever hiked at night was Grand Canyon. I don't understand why people hike at night. You don't see anything, and then it's hot and brutal, and you're yep, totally hiking at night. Right. Love this shit.
Yeah, right among we talked about weight, but among the hazards of Grand Canyon, it's also a desert, kind of a hostile desert environment. So yeah, on top of all the other things that add to the weight, there were times when I think Rich and I were carrying 6 liters of water each, which just adds insult to injury, basically.
Yeah, I mean it's crushing, right? The minute you throw 6 liters of water in your pack, you could have a 400-foot rope that weighs less.
Yeah,
and so you begin to realize that these multi-day trips, you really. I would encourage people that are doing stuff in the Grand Canyon to start in a progressive way. Todd did an amazing job in this book in kind of talking about which canyons are relatively easy and which ones are relatively hard. And wise people open a book like that and look at things that seem to be within their experience level, and they go do those and they learn something and they acquire judgment by progressively doing canyons. And at some point in time, you're experienced enough and acquired enough judgment to do the harder, more remote stuff. But it's incredibly unforgiving. You don't hike around the Grand Canyon for a long time without having friends that have died, without having people that have been helicoptered out, without, and the things that are most dangerous in the Grand Canyon are not the things people think of. It's not navigation and getting lost. It's water. Where are you going to find water?
In the heat. Yeah.
And how much water do you need to carry between sources? And, what do you expect to find in the canyon for water? Are you accustomed to this, off-trail scrambling? Most canyoneers, in my view, would probably do fine in most Grand Canyon limestone slots. Most are not particularly difficult, but they aren't accustomed to getting off the rim with all the vertical elements and all the scrambling and the difficult terrain. And they aren't accustomed to dealing with water issues. And they're often not accustomed with an expedition mentality. If you're going to be out for 3 or 4 or 5 days hitting canyons, what do you put into your kit to keep the weight under control and still have enough food to, move around, and where are you going to get water and stuff like that? Those are things that trip people up. The canyons themselves, I think a lot of canyoneers are competent enough in the canyons to do these canyons. Unfortunately, that's 20% of the problem. 80% of the problem is getting there. The canyons are less difficult than the approaches and the exits by far. And most canyoneers don't have the experience with traveling over the terrain that's required for the approaches and the exits. They would tend to do okay in canyons, I think. Although, there aren't a lot of courtesies in these canyons. A lot of the starts are awkward and hard. There are very few bolts. I mean, despite the fact we've talked about bolts in this episode, Todd and I have done a few thousand rappels in the Grand Canyon, and I think we placed, less than 20 bolts ever. It's very rare in the Grand Canyon to have to place a bolt. It's very rare. There are only particular circumstances where things are polished so smooth you don't have options. It's actually quite a nice environment for natural anchors. And you get pretty skilled at learning how to create natural anchors in the Grand Canyon. And it's different in limestone than sandstone. You can do some things in limestone that you wouldn't dare do in sandstone.
What would those differences be?
Well, one example is knot chocks can work very well in limestone because the rock is so hard. In sandstone, you got to be pretty careful that you're not, that you can clean a crack well enough that the knot seats properly, that you're not going to pull chunks of sandstone out of the slot. Hooks can work well in limestone, but hooks can cause sandstone to disintegrate before your eyes. So, they're just things. There are different rules there that you learn over time.
Awesome. So we've talked about your favorite canyons. What are some of the canyons that you would not return to?
Well,
are there any?
I think there are probably a few. I do remember Todd and I joking a few times that, we had done something and then we'd look at each other and it's like, yep, we did that canyon, so nobody else ever has to.
That is the roll of the dice when it comes to exploration.
Did you put those in your book or no?
I did. In fact, there's one canyon. Boy, it's near Thunder River. The name escapes me at the
Bonita
moment.
Creek.
Bonita Creek. I put together a rating system of 1 to 5 stars, and this canyon got a 0 stars.
You have no idea how hard it is to, rate something 0 on a scale of 1 to 5.
That's right.
Yeah, sounds awesome. So what was so good about Bonita Creek?
It was some of the ratings are subjective. I think Todd will tell you that. But in that canyon, I mean, it wasn't a great canyon. There's no doubt about it. But it got especially somber when we realized that when we did that canyon, there was a person, a backpacker, that went down that canyon by accident, got trapped, couldn't get out, and they died. And all of the gear the SAR team used was still there when we went through. And we realized at that point that this is where that guy died. And we picked up hundreds of feet of webbing and cleaned up all of the systems the SAR team had built as part of the extraction process to get this poor kid out of there.
Oh, wow.
So that, I think, tends to kind of weigh on you. You start missing the, small opportunities for beauty in that canyon, and you're just constantly thinking about the fact that, this kid, he was an NAU college student. He was, 22 years old, I think, 21 years old, young kid, and he died there. He typed his last thoughts to his parents on his BlackBerry, and they found it, afterwards. Super sad.
Wow, that is sad.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think Todd and I have found any reason to ever go back there.
I probably wouldn't return either in those circumstances. Honestly, yeah, that would be hard.
Yeah.
So what type of epic lessons have you learned in Grand Canyon?
Well, I think one of there are lots of things that are similar about Todd and I. We're both engineers, so we both have that kind of analytical mind. We were always interested in the slot canyons. The one place where Todd and I diverge is I always enjoyed the journey getting to the canyons and the journey getting out. And Todd didn't enjoy those journeys sometimes. And as a result,
that's fair.
After Todd published his book, he was, less interested in Grand Canyon slots. And I got more interested in just long journeys in the canyon below the rim. And so it's kind of a interesting evolution, I guess, of things in the canyon.
Yeah, I'll say this. So, when people think about exploration, I think they think about the romantic parts of it. There's the excitement of seeing new things, traveling to new places, and possibly being the first person to set foot in a particular area. What they probably don't think of as often are just the mundane aspects of exploration. You're packing your gear up for the millionth time. You're driving 8-9 hours again, to get to a remote part of Grand Canyon. You're hiking over, you're just hot, tired, hungry, thirsty, dirty. There's a lot about exploration that is not glamorous. I guess is one way to put it. And boy, for probably a 6-year period, Rich and I organized our lives around exploration of Grand Canyon. I organized, both of us organized our jobs so that we could maximize the amount of time off we had so we could spend it in Grand Canyon. We maximized, basically used every vacation that we had. And in addition to that, after every trip, I was spending all of our, any downtime I had writing about, putting the maps together and writing about the trips. So to sustain that level of enthusiasm for so many years, at a certain point, burnout is certainly a possibility, and that's what happened to me. At a certain point in the journey, I completely burned out, but we weren't finished. So we kept going for a number of at least another year or two beyond that point. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I think those aspects that Todd is talking about are things you don't think about, but they're really important. And you also start to think about, there's a point where so much exploration has been done. The engineering mind starts to think about the statistics behind what you've done and the possibility of an accident or a screw up or just something that doesn't go right. And it's amazing that we're both phenomenally safe and phenomenally skilled, and I don't ever feel like, even though we had been in some serious jams before, we were never in a jam where we couldn't think our way through options and come up with a safe way to continue down canyon. But it is interesting how this weighs on you psychologically when you're exploring, because you can go for a period of time where you're just finding okay canyons, small moments of coolness, so a beautiful photo here and there. And all of a sudden, after a drought for a year or two, you find an amazing place, drop dead gorgeous, 5-star place, and it changes your entire mood. All of a sudden, you come back to that, incredible kind of marvelous sense of wonder that got you into exploring in the first place. And Todd and I had done so much in the Grand Canyon that the opportunities to find the most amazing places were largely gone. I mean, I would venture a guess that we have probably seen the vast majority of amazing places in the Grand Canyon. There are some left, maybe, but it's an enormous amount of work. It's twice as hard as it was, maybe 4 times as hard as it was when we were younger and our backs were stronger, when it was a green field and every place we went was, had not been explored. What I have left on my list is enormously hard stuff. And so I do think that over a period of time in a particular place, you do reach this point where you're not getting enough, 5-star, drop dead gorgeous, amazing stuff to replenish the gas tank.
Well, that makes sense for sure. Do you ever revisit the canyons to see how they've changed over the years?
I do often. When I turned 56 and a half years ago, and I retired at that point, and that gave me the opportunity to go spend more time in the canyon. And I started doing a lot of different things. I got interested in archaeology and long treks beneath the rim, but I also, go back with friends and do a lot of canyons. So many canyons I've done many times, and I've had a chance to see how they've changed. And I'm really interested in a couple of canyons right now that had massive flash floods in the last couple of weeks and how they may have changed. So yeah, I go back and, I still spend 70 days a year below the rim right now. And
awesome.
Often that's, doing canyons. I tend to prefer cherry picking some of the just drop dead gorgeous, amazing places Todd and I had found over doing new exploration. I still do some exploration, but it's, in the order of, a couple of canyons a year, not at the pace Todd and I were at. And largely that's because I just don't want to carry a spool of rope and things like that. But I definitely prefer to go back and see these, just stunningly beautiful places we found over the years and see how they've changed. The drought was fascinating over the last couple of years. I've got to tell you, there were some canyons that we had done 10 years ago that had a lot of pools that were enormously wet. And in the last 2 years, I visited a few of those canyons, and the keeper potholes that formed from these pools drying up scared the bejesus out of me. There were some keepers, they still have water, but now the water is, the lip is 6 feet above the water level. And so, it was unusual for us to have to deal with keepers. We did occasionally. But in the last couple of years, I've been shocked at some drop dead gorgeous, amazing canyons that we had found years ago and how they changed and how they had keeper potholes and how they were much, much more dangerous than they were before.
That is interesting. Did you guys get a lot of rain the last couple of weeks, or how's Arizona?
Oh boy.
We've had it in the Phoenix area, where we live, epic rains. I've had 6.5 inches at my house, which is in the last month, by the way, which is like the annual rainfall.
Nice.
But the Grand Canyon has also just been blasted. If you look, the Colorado River flows, usually it's a dam release out of Glen Canyon Dam. Usually it's between 8 and 16,000 cubic feet a second. It's a little more in the summer for hydro generation than it is in the winter, but it's in that neighborhood. In the last couple of weeks, the Paria had hit 2,000 cubic feet a second. The Little Colorado River had hit 15,000 cubic feet a second.
Wow.
And all these other tributaries in the Grand Canyon that don't have gauges were flooding. I mean, there were points in time where the river was probably at 30 or 35,000 cubic feet a second, all from chocolate flash flood runoff in the last couple of weeks. Those drainages, when they flood, some of the drainages that flooded went really big in the last couple of weeks. So it will be interesting to go back and see how many garage-sized boulders have been rearranged.
Yeah, I kind of overlooked the Kaibab, and we've had some impressive lightning storms, and just like at my house, just intense rain and hail, and yeah, it's been awesome. So it'd be cool to see.
It has been a good monsoon year.
Yeah, we needed it for sure.
Very much.
For sure. All right. Do you have any more favorite stories about Grand Canyon?
Oh God, I don't think you have.
Talk for days, right?
Lots of it's not. There are lots of little things that happen along the way that you don't necessarily think about. There was a time when we were doing some exploration work in one canyon system, and Todd and I were charged by a bighorn ram.
That's kind of cool.
Well, at the time, it was kind of terrifying.
I've been charged by a sheep before. It's really terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that type 3 terrifying. You're like, that was cool. Later, after they stop ramming you.
Yeah. You realize that this is a gigantic ecosystem, a lot of animals, and they live there. And
you're in their house. You got to let them get by.
Yeah, we happened to be going up a slot canyon that we could get out with non-technical means. We had been up this before, and this bighorn ram knew where the water was and was up in the canyon getting water. And when we showed up, we pinned him in. He had nowhere to go. And it didn't dawn on us at first. We thought, oh, look, that's cool. There's a ram. And he looked at us, and he paced back and forth between the walls of the slot, left and right. And Todd and I both had our cameras out, and all of a sudden he stopped, and he kind of looked at us, and he put his head down, and here he comes. So we both tried to get as thin as possible up against the wall of the slot and make sure that he understood that there was plenty of space for him to get by. We weren't gonna impede his progress. Things you don't think about.
Yeah, not at all. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, I know that canyoneering makes me really, really hungry. So I'm curious, what is your favorite in canyon snack?
Oh boy, this is another case where I've eaten the same thing on hikes over and over and over again. When I was in between semesters in college, I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and at the time I ate. I was very poor college student. I ate a lot of tuna fish and noodles, and afterwards, it had been. It was 25 years after that hike before I was able to eat tuna fish, and I think I'm at that place with pretty much all backpacking food. So,
except for Baby Ruth.
Yeah. So basically, any food that the less it resembles backpacking food, the less it resembles bar shapes or things like that, that's probably more appealing to me at this point.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'll echo Todd's experience. If you spend lots of time on a long journey, I spent 2 months below the rim once traversing the canyon. At the end of that experience, there was certain freeze-dried food I could never eat again.
Yeah, and just the smell typically
Yeah.
will set you off.
Yep.
Right.
Mountain House beef stroganoff. Please don't open it near.
Anything Mountain House to me is hideous. I
Yeah.
can't handle Mountain House.
My-
Backpacker Pantry too. No.
There are some at Backpackers Pantry that are okay, but yeah, you definitely after a long period of time, you learn to hate certain foods and to such a degree that you can never go back. But I do. I'm a huge fan of Huppy bars. I love these bars. They are just terrific. They're all organic. They're a lot of bars
Huppy bar
are too big. You eat half a bar, like you eat half a Pro bar. It's like, oh, I can't eat the rest of that. These are like sized perfectly. They're organic. They taste good. I love the chocolate Java bar or the orange pecan. My two favorites. I can actually eat those things. So it's my current like go-to. Like, got to get some food right this second. I'll grab a Huppy bar.
Huffy, like Huffy?
No, Huppy, like Huppy.
Huppy. Okay. I'm gonna have to look that up. I haven't heard of them, but they sound good.
Super
the orange
good.
pecan sounds really good.
The Lindsay Hupp founded the company that makes this bar. She's lives in Flagstaff and was a Grand Canyon River guide, and they make these bars in Flagstaff. You can buy them, and it's easy to buy them in Flagstaff. It's a little harder to get them other places, but yeah, they're delicious. It's my go-to snack right now.
Nice. Very cool. Okay, what's your favorite after canyon beverage? Get rehydrated.
Oh, for me, it's probably Mountain Dew. Something with caffeine is always helps after a long time in the canyon. Although I've heard they're coming out with a hard Mountain Dew, so maybe
a seltzer.
Yeah,
like a hard Mountain Dew with alcohol in it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now you're talking.
That might be my new favorite. We'll have to see. Although I'm not sure how appetizing.
It's a sugar rush, a caffeine rush, and some alcohol.
That's right.
All the vice.
Awesome.
Well, I'm a big fan of Fat Tires or Sierra Nevada. I'll love to drink a beer after a hike. Unfortunately, we're usually, when Todd and I were out exploring a lot more, we're usually scrambling to get back home because, we got out of the canyon, it's dusk, and we've got, a 10-hour drive to get home to go to work the next day. So
right.
It was really cut into this.
Yeah, I can drink the beer, but probably not. Awesome. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go and why?
I would love to. Well, I wanted to just thank you for doing this podcast. It's so interesting to hear about the, especially the international canyoneers that you've had on recently. I find that fascinating, and it's giving me ideas of more places I would like to go. But boy, I've had my heart set on Australia and New Zealand for a long time. I've seen some beautiful canyons over there.
Yeah.
But someday I would.
That actually was top on my list, and for some reason I made it to Costa Rica before Australia, but Australia is really high on my list for sure.
Well, I'll tell you that podcast you did with those guys from Costa Rica that were descending that exploratory canyon in the volcano. I listened to that yesterday, and I think I sent Todd a note at some point. It's like, yeah, we ain't got nothing on these guys.
How are we going to follow that?
I mean, the Grand Canyon is really impressive anyway, so
Yeah.
that's awesome. But
If I had,
in Costa Rica, that's intense.
like Todd, I'd love to go see some of the canyons in the Blue Mountains, like Claustral that you've seen. I really got into photography since I retired, and I'd love to go to these really scenic canyons. I don't really care how technical they are at all, but I think the one place I really like to go to, and I keep telling some friends over there that I'm going to make it over, and I need to make it happen one of these days. I'd love to go to Ticino in Switzerland and do some of the canyons there, like Ladrino and some of those limestone canyons with running water. The pictures that some of these guys, one of our friends, Pascal Van Duyn or Matthias Holzinger, the canyons they're doing over there and some of the exploration stuff they're doing over there is just so inspiring. And these canyons are so beautiful. It's just amazing.
Yeah, they are very beautiful. I hope to get Pascal on. I need to reach out to him, actually.
Pascal used to do a lot of exploratory stuff with Todd and I in the very early days, up until the point where he broke his ankle in a toboggan and he couldn't hike on that kind of terrain anymore. But we did a lot with Pascal early on.
Yeah, Tom mentioned to reach out, but I was in the transition of my new audio and I haven't reached out. So I need to do that for sure. That'd be awesome. Yeah, so many places to go, so many things to see.
Yeah. It's endless, actually.
For sure.
I mean, you think about this for a minute. Zion became well known in the 90s and the 2000s as, just the slot canyon mecca. But all of a sudden, with the explosion of canyoneering, the people getting into this activity and the people that are interested in exploration, you're starting to learn that the planet's filled with slot canyons. They're everywhere, from Nepal to Costa Rica. Those guys with the Toro group that opened those canyons down there. I mean, who would have thought of going to Costa Rica 10 years ago? Nobody. And the Grand Canyon was the same way. Todd and I found ourselves in this really special moment in time where we realized that there was this place that had virtually no traffic and we could explore at will. So it's amazing. It's a big planet and there's slot canyons everywhere.
Yeah. Georgia, Uray, Colorado, everywhere.
Pacific Northwest looks beautiful too.
Yeah, I've got them coming up in September.
Oh, good. Yeah,
that'll be exciting.
I'm curious about that area.
Yeah, me too, for sure. Anyway, do you have any safety tips for our listeners tonight?
Well, I would just suggest that if you want to go into the Grand Canyon and have fun and see amazing places, be thoughtful about it and be progressive. Start with things that are relatively straightforward, acquire a knowledge base of how you move in that kind of terrain. Because, if you're less thoughtful about that and less thoughtful about the rules, and there are a lot of rescues and, rule violation issues, the National Park Service is likely to reconsider at least rulemaking around canyoning, right? You have to think about the fact that the canyons you're doing today impact people's access tomorrow. And so just be thoughtful about it. Have fun, but be progressive. There's no reason to crack open Todd's book to Pete's Cave Canyon and make that the first one you go to, because that's probably not going to end well. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I would say is, and I don't hear this mentioned often enough. I think fitness plays a big role in safety. The fitter you are, I think the less likely you are to be injured to begin with. But it also gives you options if you find yourself in a rough spot. Maybe options that you wouldn't have if you're less fit. Having a exercise program outside of just doing canyons, I think, is really important. Also, eat your vegetables, get 8 hours sleep. I'm not your mom, but the healthier you are, I think the less likely you are to be injured.
I agree with that a lot, because I was supposed to do my Thunder River Deer Creek hike in May, and then COVID hit, so I couldn't do it. Yeah. And then we rescheduled for October. But I spent most of the summer planning for my wedding and not hiking, and I was probably in some of the worst shape ever. And I hated myself. I hated the hike. I hated my heavy backpack. Like it was steep and there were many tears shed. And I couldn't imagine having another extra 20 pounds with my canyoneering gear and pack raft and all that stuff. And so definitely the progression and the train for it before you get out there would definitely make your trip not only enjoyable, but like successful, I think.
There you go. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad that you guys brought that up.
Completely agree. you cannot you'll find yourself a victim of some unhappy extraction if you take that place too lightly. It happens to 400 people a year.
Yeah.
That's how many rescues there are in the Grand Canyon that are done, and almost 300 are helicopter extractions. I mean, it's a place where a lot of, and there are on average maybe 20 fatalities a year. It's just not a great place to not be prepared.
Yeah. Definitely needs some respect.
Right.
Well, awesome.
Thanks for having us on. This has been fun.
All right. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. So if you guys are done, I think the canyons are calling. We should probably go.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Charles.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Cheryl.
have an awesome night.
You too.
Well, that concludes my interview with Todd Martin and Rich Rudow. I hope you're ready to go to the Grand Canyon. I know I am. Really looking forward to my room to room trip in November. That's for sure. If you want more information about Rich Rudow and Todd Martin, you can find it now on my new website, thecanyonsercalling.com. I'm going to have links to the videos that I mentioned earlier, Into the Canyon and The Last of the Great Unknown. I'll also have links to both of their websites and more information about them. Check out my new website. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. I'll have links to those in the show notes. If you have an idea for the show, if you like the show, or if you want to be a guest on the show, you can reach out to me at thecanyonsercalling@gmail.com. Getting those inspirational emails about how you enjoy the show really inspire me to get more guests and more content on here. So thanks for everyone who has reached out so far. The canyons are calling. I gotta go.